since the book was published, and I enjoy them. And I kind of very informal, like I am. I'll give you maybe a little spiel about how the book came to fruition, the process behind it, a little bit of that. But I definitely want to hear from you and answer any questions you have. So, Joe said I write for the Maine Sportsman, so I actually started writing before that. When I was at college at UMaine, I had a friend that was a sports editor of the Maine Daily Campus, I think it was called, and I think it was in my junior year. I was in my junior year. He said, "Would you like to write a column about hunting and fishing?" Because I was a wildlife student. I started out as a biology major, switched to wildlife biology, and I really enjoyed that. So I said, absolutely, because I spent most of my time when I wasn't in class hunting or fishing. And Orono was a great place to do that, and all my roommates did it. So I started doing that little tiny column, and the chair of the wildlife department, Bucky Owen, who went on later to become commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, he got a hold of me and said, "Hey, the New England Outdoor Writers is having a scholarship, and you'd be great to apply for it because you're an outdoor writer. It's what they support. So why don't you apply for it?" So I did. And I had an interview with Bud Levitt, and I can't remember who the other guy was. I don't know if anybody remembers Bud Levitt, but Bud Levitt was a longtime sports columnist, hunting and fishing columnist for the Bangor Daily News. He wrote a book called 12 Months in Maine, and he was a big buddy of Ted Williams, and a lot of his antics involved going hunting and fishing with Ted Williams. Well, I didn't get the scholarship. They gave it to a graduate student that was studying pine marten, and I don't know why, but I don't know what that had to do with the outdoor writing. But I'm now a member of the New England Outdoor Writers Association. Still a little bitter I didn't get the scholarship, but I bought his book and I read it. It was called 12 Months in Maine, and I liked it. It was very very interesting to read. I like the old stuff, how people trapped or hunted or fished in the older days. Um, but when I read it, he kind of bounced around a little bit and he talked about skiing and things like that, which a little bit offside the topic. I ski, but a little bit offside the topic of hunting and fishing. And I had in the back of my mind, I said, if I ever wrote a book, I'd kind of follow the seasons and more so the months, because that's how I kind of operate. Right now I live on Sebago Lake. I guide there part time, and salmon fishing and lake trout fishing is pretty good. But I'm already looking forward to the end of the month when bird season starts. That's one of my biggest joys. So, and then of course deer season is going to start, and then ice fishing. So I'm always thinking that way. When I graduated from college, I got a job as a police officer, and I did a 32-year career doing that. Retired 7 years ago, and right now my full-time job is I run the state fraud investigation unit. But when I was a young police officer, I had an awful lot of time on my hands. We worked a great schedule, 3 on, 3 off. So I hunted and fished all the time. And the Maine Sportsman, which is the largest sporting publication in New England, you see it in maybe some of the gas stations, grocery stores, that kind of thing. They had an opening for a columnist in the Auburn area, and at the time I was living and working in Auburn. So I applied, that was 1995. I applied for and got that position writing that column. My parents had a place on Sebago Lake. That was their summer home, and that's where I live now, part-time. I live there in Cumberland. Um, then they opened up the Sebago region for a columnist, and they decided to merge it. For a while, I wrote 2 columns. Then they merged them into one, I think to save money. They only had to pay me one paycheck. So for 27 years, I've been writing that column, and I have to write what to do every month. So I just last night wrote and I'm 2 months ahead. So last night I wrote my November column. So I wrote about deer hunting and what goes on in November. That's the big draw in November. So for 27 years, I've been thinking about every month. And usually when I write a column, I'll go back to last year and I'll throw in an anecdotal story. So it causes me to think back, causes me to have a lot of memories. Plus, it causes me to have on my computer 27 years of stock, 27 years of stories, 27 years of things that I did, adventures. So if I don't remember them, I go back to them. I got a pretty good memory. So I kind of got the bug a few years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, to sit down and write a book. And I said, I'm going to do it like Bud Levitt's, but I'm going to follow the months. So that was where A Sporting Year in Maine came from. And how I describe it is it's kind of the journal of an average outdoors person, which I consider myself just an average outdoors person, what they do every year, what they do every month, and then a lot of things that have happened to me over the maybe a little how to. some humorous stories. I kind of have a good sense of humor. It might be a little off color once in a while, but a lot of funny things happen in the woods to me and my dog and my hunting partner. Um, and then I talk about a few other things that are important. Camps, whether you go to a fancy sporting lodge somewhere or a rustic camp. And on the way up here, it brought back a good memory. One of my roommates in college had a camp in Corinna, and when I say it was a deer camp, and when I say a camp, and I went right by the road, although it looks much different now. Um, but it was literally a plywood shack, and the refrigerator was a hole in the door in the wall that had a box with holes drilled through it. So you'd put your stuff kind of outside, but the animals couldn't get at it. That was a refrigerator, and I got my first deer though. So it's a fond memory, and that was 1987. So what is that? 35 years ago. So coming up here, I had a real fond memory of that. My other roommate was from Greenville, so we spent an awful lot of time up there on the weekends, long holidays, ice fishing, bird hunting, doing all that kind of stuff. So I wrote about camps. I talked about dogs because sporting dogs have been a big part of my life growing up, and I've had a lot of great dogs and great memories. So that's a chapter. Boats were another important thing for me, spending a lot of time on the water. We spent a lot of time on Sebago, growing up Rangeley Lake, Sunapee, New Hampshire, and boating was a big thing for me. And you mentioned that seventh graders can be a little rambunctious. Well, I was kind of a rambunctious kid. I don't know. Some of my friends don't know how I became a police officer, but I did. I passed the test. I passed the polygraph, and I never got arrested for anything. But my dad would kind of hold things over me, and one of those things was a boat operation. I could only drive the boat when I was mature enough, and the other factor was to be able to start the engine. I tried when I was about 8 to start, and I think it was 10 by the time I was strong enough to be able to start the engine. Firearms were another thing. I couldn't have a firearm until I could show that I had responsibility, which was obviously a smart thing on my dad's part. So boats, dogs, camps, and then I've had the fortune to do a lot of traveling for sporting, some hunting and a lot of fishing. Most parts of Canada, from Quebec to Labrador to um, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and then some in the Caribbean for fishing. Some of those trips have been because I'm a writer, and I used to write for a lot of national magazines. And the Canadian government, for one, would send writers from other places there to Canada to experience their outdoors through a guide, an outfitter, or something like that. So I had some great bird hunts, some great bear hunt, great caribou hunt. So I talk a lot about traveling trips that I took. So primarily, the chapters are the months, January, February through, and then those other areas that I talked about. Um, and when I wrote the book, it would have been 3 winters ago that I actually finished writing it. It was published about a year ago. So I'd come home from work. It was the middle of winter, cold, nothing to do at night, and I sat down every night and just got in my chair and started typing and going through my memory banks. And it was a great process because it caused me to call up a few old friends I hadn't talked to in years and say, "Hey, remember that time you and I got a deer?" And just to make sure that everything was accurate, because for me, accuracy is very important. Um, so I sat down in 2 weeks and wrote the book. 2 weeks, every night for 2 weeks straight. And when I say wrote it, the rudimentary. I sat down and did an outline first, and then I went and filled in the chapters. I didn't do the dogs, the camps, and the traveling ones. I did the months, but I had the meat and potatoes done in about 2 weeks, and then I walked away from it. Came back to it, polished it up, finished it, and then really had to decide what I wanted to do. And I thought about self-publishing because you probably have a lot of self-published books here at the library. That's kind of a big thing. It's kind of easy to do now because there are so many places that will help you do it. Everything is electronic, so I could submit it electronically. But then I talked to a couple of friends. One friend is Bruce Coffin. I don't know if you know that name. Bruce is a retired Portland Police Detective Sergeant, and he has a great murder mystery series. He's a national bestseller. He's done really well. He'd be a great guy to have up here. He's definitely on the library circuit. He's done phenomenally well with his writing. And I talked to Tom Seymour, who's a fellow writer for the Maine Sportsman. He's written about probably 8 or 10 books. I bet you probably have some here about edible plants in Maine, some fishing books. Maybe I can't remember what the other ones are.
He does all the foraging.
Foraging,
Yeah,
yep, yeah,
yeah,
wild
yeah. We have a
foraging,
lot of his
yeah,
foraging books
yeah.
here.
So they both told me the same thing. They said send it to a publisher, and if a publisher picks it up, that means it's it has some draw. So I sent it to Down East, which is kind of a big one. Uh, that's the when you're applying for college, that's the Harvard. Um, North Country Press and Islandport Press, all New England, well, Maine publishers. And North Country and Islandport responded that they wanted to publish it. I went with North Country because she was the first one to respond. Never heard from Down East, never even got a rejection letter from them. But they're busy, and this is more either Islandport or North Country Press's genre, where really it's not Down East genre. So I kind of understand that. But so I had the manuscript, and I printed it out. I kill a lot of trees. I still like to hold a book and feel paper. I don't like to read things online. In my position as a director of the fraud investigation unit, our cases are sometimes 12 three-ring binders full of documents, mostly bank records, tax records, and you just can't scroll through 1,000 pages on a screen and look back, and it's not easy. So anyway, I printed out, went through it. I then sent it to Will Lund, who's the publisher, I'm sorry, the editor of the Maine Sportsman. His father and he own it. John Lund used to be a district attorney up in Kennebec County. John's the principal of that company, and Will's with him. He's the editor. So sent it to Will. He edited it, sent it back to me, and then I sent it to the publisher, Pat Newell. And she had a professional editor edit it, and I got a great compliment. She said it was the cleanest copy she'd ever gotten, other than there were a few, like I had double hyphens, and I didn't do that. It was a formatting thing. If I had a hyphen, somehow it doubled it. And there was a couple of spacing, but again, format from whatever I was using to what she was using. But so that was nice to hear. And then then I was in line. So she had 3 books before me. So that really dragged it out. But probably one of the most exciting days was when she sent the proof copy. This isn't it, but she sent a proof copy. And the page wasn't centered right. The top of it was kind of cut off, but at least it was a copy of the book. I neglected to talk about the photograph. So doing a lot of writing for national magazines, I got into slide photography many years ago, and that's how we did photography. If we're going to do a magazine picture, it had to be a slide because it had to be easily reproduced. Regular film doesn't have the quality. So I had a ton of slides of past hunting and fishing trips. And lately, of course, I've been doing digital photography. And of course, what do you have with you all the time? You have your phone. Most of my pictures are on my cell phone. And there are programs available that you can enhance the dots per inch. So I bought one of them, and I'm not a computer guy. I can turn the computer on, I can use it, but I self-taught. So I bought a flatbed scanner, and I scanned all my slides electronic. I bought a converter to convert these to a higher resolution picture, did all that, and then I went through and captioned them and inserted them where they belonged. And I also I hired an artist, Barry Julius. He's out of Massachusetts, and he does the illustrations for the duck stamps. And he did some of you in back can't see it, but he did pencil drawings for every chapter. So this is May, so there's a turkey for May. April has a salmon because that's what I target the most. February has a lake trout. So I reached out to him and I said I wanted to hire you to do some sketches for the chapters. Told him what I wanted, and I said give me a price. And he came back with $50 a picture, which is pretty good for an artist of his quality. He's won national awards for his duck stamps and everything. So he kind of gave me he's a fellow New England Outdoor Writer Association member. So he gave me a great deal. So, and I got to keep the proof, so I've got really nice drawings that he did. I had to reduce them down and send them. But anyway, I got the proof, and that was really cool. I opened it up out of the wrapper and I saw it and went through it, and it just she did a nice job. It's got kind of that matte finish which I like, and everything was as it was supposed to be. But she said go through it, and I don't know how many times I've read this thing. I mean, I read it on the computer, I read it in hard copy, I read it after both editors came back with it. I really didn't think there was anything more to read, but I sat down, I read it front to back, And I got to a section in it that talks, I think it talks about boats. Yeah, it's the section on boats. So that would be maybe after, that's the first chapter after well, it's after the traveling section. So I was reading through it. Does anybody know who Carrie Stevens is? Does that name ring a bell? Carrie Stevens was from the Rangeley area.
Oh, is she the one that did the flies?
Yes, she invented the gray ghost, which is probably one of the most popular flies, streamer flies, especially for us, how we fish. Anybody heard of Herbert Welch? He was a taxidermist and a guide up in the Rangeley area at the same time, the 19 probably 20s to 40s or so, and he invented a fly called the black ghost, a very popular pattern. Um, my boat that I guide on Sebago is a aluminum boat, and it's primarily black in color. I've never named a boat, but I felt it was important to name this boat, so I called it the Black Ghost. And it's on the back, it's labeled on the back. And in the book, I talk about my boat and how it's named after Carrie Stevens' famous fly, the Black Ghost. Well, I mixed the two up.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad, because I couldn't believe it when I read it. I had to go back and read it again. And I couldn't believe that I made that error. I mean, I've been writing about the gray ghost forever. I've been writing about the black ghost. I attribute each to the right people. Somehow my signals got crossed and I made a mistake. And I immediately called Pat up, the publisher, and said, don't send that to press. She goes, no, I'm not. I'm waiting for your responses, if there's any. And I said, yeah, I made a glaring error, because anybody that is a moderate level outdoors person, if they saw that, they'd read it and they'd think I'm the biggest idiot. So I'm very glad. I kept that. She let me keep the copy, and I have it at home, and I wrote inside, proof copy, error on page whatever, so that if ever it gets in somebody's hands, they know that it was a mistake. I'll blame it on the publisher, I guess, but it was definitely me. So, and then once I went through it, that was the only mistake that I found, and I haven't found any. A couple times I've gone through it. So then it went to press, and then it was published. So it was really a great, a fun process, and it made me want to do another book. So, but I'm very slow in starting. Living on Sebago Lake now I moved there full time the last 3 years, although I split my time between there and Cumberland, but I'm there most of the time. Guiding on the lake. My goal was to guide when I retired, and I decided to start that early, and guide part-time. There's about 6 of us that guide on the lake, and most all of us have some other job. My best friend's a fireman. There's another guy that owns a machine shop, so he has a lot of spare time. But Sebago is neat. It's the home of the original strain of landlocked salmon. So there are 4 bodies of water that when the glaciers receded, the seas receded, and lakes were formed, salmon got caught. And it's really the same species, although a subspecies, of the Atlantic salmon. And its scientific name is Salmo salar sebago, and that designates that it's the landlocked salmon, not the ocean salmon. Branch Lake, Green Lake, and I can't remember the other one, Sebago Lake, and there's one other, was 4. So it's also the home of the world record salmon back in the 20s, or no, 1907 was when that was taken, 22-pounder. So it's got a lot of cool history, but not a lot written about it. What really is the heyday is the Moosehead region and the Rangeley region of guides and people coming up here. And as I've been doing research, I wanted to do a story on the guides of Sebago Lake, so the past history. Well, there's not a lot of information out there. I know the guy that not guided the world record salmon, but the guy that mounted it, the guy that did the taxidermy, he was a guide. I have some information on him. I have some information on a few of the guides through books that I've found, but really I've got a couple from the 70s, and then that's it, and it kind of drops off. And what happened is when people would come mostly from New York or Boston, they'd come up to Sebago, they'd recreate there. There was a casino up there. There was steamboats. There was a lot of activity. There was a canal that you could go from Long Lake all the way down through Sebago to Portland Harbor, and they had a commerce route. It was a series of canals with 28 different locks. One lock remains. There's one lock you can go through now. It's historical. But the guides were farmers that did it part-time, kind of like we're doing it now, a lot of the guides on Sebago. When motor transport and trains really became more popular. They went up to Rangeley, they went up to Moosehead, and the sports went up there. And that's how those areas got more popular. They had full-time guides, they had full-time lodges. Sebago had a lot of cottages to rent, but it wasn't a lot, it wasn't, I don't know of any fishing lodge on Sebago Lake. They were all recreational or beach type things. So I ran into difficulty finding content. So I've decided to switch gears a little bit and say, uh, I think I'll call the book The Guides of Sebago Lake, Past and Present. And I'll talk about how they fished. Well, first, how the lake formed, the Native American history on it, which is a ton of Native American history about that area, how they fished, some of the early guides, contrast it to how we fish now with, I mean, my boat has autopilot, it's got electric downriggers that change the depth as the bottom changes, so really high tech. But we're catching the same fish because the original strain of those fish, although they stock them, there's still native fish in that lake because they clip the fins of the salmon when they stock them, so they know what year it was. So if it's got the left dorsal ventricle fin, the right one, they can tell what year the fish was stocked. Out of all the salmon I've caught this summer, I've only caught one clipped fin. So the fish, most of the fish I've caught are naturally recurring salmon. Now the salmon have declined quite a bit on Sebago, but we're hoping to bring them back up. But I think it would make a good book to contrast a lot of that then and now. So other than really writing the outline for the book, I haven't started any. I really need to get on it, but I guess I'm waiting for some more of those cold winter nights to do it. So maybe this will be the winter. I don't know. They say it's going to be a doozy. Who knows? But anyway, so that's kind of the process. It's kind of how I did it. I guess I'd open up to any questions. If you had any questions about it at all. Yeah, go ahead.
So, after you wrote it and it came out, and I'm new to the area, so I don't really know the background, but did you get reviews and stuff? What kind of response
No,
did you have?
I know it's on Amazon and nobody's reviewed it on Amazon. It's on the publisher, and I don't think her website has any reviews. I did send it I sent it out to a number of other writers and got them to do a review on it. So I've got Tom Seymour, I've got Bob Romano, who writes a series of books about the Rangeley region. He's out of New Jersey, but he's got a summer place up there. Will Lund, who's the editor of the Maine Sportsman, and then the late George Smith, who was he wrote a number of books, A Life Lived Outdoors, Maine Sporting Camps, and A Lifetime of Hunting Fishing. He was the longtime director of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, big lobbyist and a big name in the outdoors. I'm glad George had a chance to read it and write a review for me before he passed. He died somewhat early of Lou Gehrig's disease, about a year or two, I think, maybe 2 years back.
So when did it come out, the book?
It was about a year last May, so let's see what her publishing date is. 2021. So it was in 2021, May of 2021. But yeah, I don't think she has a review page on her website. It's been featured in a number of newspaper articles, so I've had some newspaper folks. I won't call it a review, it was more, they did a story about it. I was on the show 207 during the pandemic. I was at home, sitting in my living room, and Rob Caldwell interviewed me about the book and kind of my history and that type of thing. So, yeah.
Has an invasive fish got into Sebago?
Yep. There have been a number of them. Somebody stocked northern pike into the lake, which they've done all around. Belgrade Lake's suffered with those. Lake Auburn's got them now. But Sebago Lake has them. They don't think they're going to be a big threat to the salmon or lake trout because they're more of a shallow fish. Yeah. But we've caught some fish that have had some pretty good bite marks on their side. So I had the last 2 weeks, well, not the last 2 weeks, last weekend I was guiding. I had clients, well, no, the weekend before. So 2 weekends ago, I had clients, and we had a massive fish on, and the leader was cut above a snap swivel. So I had the lure, about 2 feet of line, and then a swivel, and then the rest of the line, and the leader was cut up here. Pike are known to roll on the line, and they roll up the line, and then their gill plate's very sharp. So I think that might have been a pike on there. It was a monstrous fish. I thought there was. I take the fish off the rod holder and hand it to the client. And in that short amount of time, I got a pretty good gauge of how big the fish is. And I pulled on this fish and thought it was bottom, and then it pulled me backward. I had to stop the boat, and then I tugged on it, and it pulled me back again. I'm like, that's a monstrous fish. So, and then in the same area the week before, I had a group of anglers. Same thing. The rod went off, different rod, but similar type situation. And I took it out of the rod holder, and it did like that, and it pulled me to the back of the boat. Handed that off to the guy, and same thing. That cut the line near the lure. It cut. So togue don't have teeth to cut a line. Pike do. So I think pike are causing us a little bit of problem. There's also crappie in Sebago that somebody put in there, and they're not a big problem. I don't support any illegal stocking fish because it throws off the ecosystem. Crappie are really in Turtle Cove and a couple other coves, and they really stay there. They're a school fish, and they stay in those coves. Smallmouth bass were not native in a lot of watersheds in Maine, and people put them, in them over the years. Sebago has a great smallmouth fishery. But what's really thrown off the ecosystem at Sebago is there were never lake trout. And now Sebago's more of a lake trout lake. So what happened in the 60s is DDT got into the lake and killed the smelt eggs. And salmon needs smelt to survive. The reason moosehead is doing so well right now with brook trout and salmon is because they've got a massive smelt population in the lake, clouds of smelt. So when the salmon went down in the 60s, Fish and Wildlife said, let's bring lake trout from, I think it was Seneca Lake. It was a deep water strain of lake trout. Let's bring them in there and put them in. And they came in, and when the salmon started coming back, they just destroyed the smelt. So the fishing club that I belong to over the years did a stocking program where we'd go to the coast with burlap bags, put it in the water when the saltwater smelter spawning, take the eggs, and Fish and Wildlife would transplant them, and they actually worked. They studied some of the caught smelt, and the genetics in the lake are still saltwater smelt. But Fish and Wildlife isn't supporting that anymore. We don't know why. We met with a biologist. We're willing to do it. It's a lot of person hours, but we're willing to do it. And for some political reason, they don't want to do it. But we've noticed the salmon have inched up. The salmon that we've caught this year they're fat bellied. They're not racers, as you call them, the skinny ones. So they've got a belly to them. I only caught two now. We caught one last weekend. Two short salmon. All my salmon have been legal size. But we're hoping they come back. But we still want to catch the lake trout too. So we kind of want to balance. So, yep.
Have you been up to Rangeley?
I go up to Rangeley all the time.
Okay.
I go every year at ice out and fish.
Okay, so you know on that, I don't know the name of the road, but it goes up right up by Rangeley.
So there's Route 4, there's Route 17, and there's South
You're on the
Quasic side or the Rangeley side?
Quasic side.
Okay, so that's
But
17
I
that comes
go
in.
to
Moose Look?
Moose
Yep,
Look
Moose Look Manor.
Mechanic.
Yep.
So we came out and then we took a right and went up. And then there's this outlook. And that.
Oh, you're talking about Height of Land? On Height of Land?
Yeah.
On
that
17? Yeah.
Yeah, that was where I found out about the fishing lures, the ghosts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it
There's a
says so
big-
on the
there's a
plaque.
big thing
Yeah.
there about both of them.
Yeah, about Carrie
It's very
Stevens. And,
interesting.
yeah, that's a historic area. So the first time I was up there as a little kid, my parents rented a cottage. It was 1976. I was 10 years old, and there's a picture of me in the book, and there's a story about me getting caught in the windstorm with a rowboat. But and I fell in love with it. I loved it up there. It was because even back then in the 70s, it was really there wasn't as developed. It's pretty undeveloped. Sebago's developed. Sebago's a very developed lake, but Rangeley still has that old charm. It really does. And so I go up there every year at ice out. I don't plan anything at work around when ice would go out, and I go up with the same guy that when I was first hired as a police officer, my lieutenant was a big outdoors person. He asked me to be put on his shift, and I got on there, and then I got promoted. I was his corporal, I was his sergeant, then I was lieutenant with him. I left and took another position with another agency, and he retired and went to LL Beans to work. But he's 81, and we're planning our bird hunting trip in a couple weeks, and he's featured prominently because he's the guy that I hunted and fished with the most, other than my dad. But he goes up there to Rangeley with me every year at ice out, and we'll be bird hunting up there. I've got both my moose up there. I'm trying to find a cottage up there to buy, but the real estate market is crazy. and I'd like to get a place to start. I'd like to go from Sebago to Rangeley and kind of split my time.
The mountains up there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's helping. Saddleback's a nice mountain. I ski there, and it is helping the area. The problem is there's not enough people to work up there.
Right.
There's no place for them to stay, and a lot of the restaurants, sadly, you struggle to find a place to have breakfast or, the old gingerbread house that was that closed. It was the Hungry Trout. No, Forks in the Air, that closed, and it's just sad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
But I think it'll come down.
I hope so. Yeah. Any other questions? Nothing.
So do you see, now you're talking about past and present and technology change and
Yeah.
so on and so forth, but do you see a change in the people that are interested in sport fishing and in hunting?
Yeah.
What's the sort of younger generation like? How
Yeah.
do they learn what they're doing and
Yeah.
how do they do it?
That's a great question. I think overall there are less people hunting and fishing now than there were, for whatever reason that is. I've had the fortune to introduce a ton of youngsters to hunting and fishing. I was a hunter safety instructor, and I had a lot of friends that had youngsters that they didn't hunt or fish, but they would have me take them out. So and a lot of those stories are in the book. My daycare provider, I have two daughters, and they never really get the hunting bug or the fishing bug heavily. My oldest daughter, who's 22 now, she shot a big turkey youth hunting, youth day. I took my youngest one deer hunting. She says, I want to go deer hunting with her. I think she was 10 or 11. We took her along. We shot a deer in front of her, and that was enough for her. She didn't want to see it. They love deer meat. The youngest one's a senior at UNH, and when my oldest one was at Orono, whenever I'd get a deer, I'd bring deer meat up to her because she loved deer meat. And I always make a summer sausage. It's a German sausage, smoked, kind of a cured sausage out of deer, and been making that forever. And my grandfather was a butcher and a German butcher, and so I kind of had the interest in that. And the girls loved that, and they would make it with me. So that's like a family tradition. My girlfriend's son is 14, and she lives on a farm in Cumberland where I stay a lot, and has a massive acreage of deer, full of deer and turkey. Never been hunted. It's always off limits because the horses. And when she met me, she realized that there are responsible hunters that can hunt around animals and be safe. And she's got a huge tick problem. So deers bring ticks. Deer bring ticks. Get it right. So she said, absolutely, you can hunt. So her 14-year-old boy never hunted. He's a gamer. He's always on the computer gaming, and took him out fishing a couple times. He really liked it. And I said, would you like to go turkey hunting this spring? That was this last spring. He goes, yeah, I would. So I taught him about it. Of course, the kids can go online and see anything on YouTube. So he did a lot of research. We put him through hunter safety. I took him shooting, got him competent with the gun. And we went out youth day. We saw all hens, and you got to shoot a tom in the spring, or a tom or a jake. And then the next week, we went out, and he got a beautiful bird. So, and he didn't bring his phone with. I was amazed, because these kids, my daughters, they're just, they're walking down the street, they're not even paying attention where they're going. They're on them constantly. And I said, yeah, you didn't bring your phone? He goes, no, I wanted to concentrate. So that was good. And immediately, and he did a great job. He shot, perfect shot. He dropped the bird very humanely and instantly. And we processed it. We made sausage out of it. We made breakfast sausage. We made jerky. He ate every scrap of it. And right after shooting it, he said, I want to deer hunt this fall. So now we're gearing up for that. Youth deer hunt is September, well, it's the week before Maine, September 22nd, I think. I think deer's, well, whatever the date is, it's, so he's gearing up for that. I took him to the range a couple weekends ago. He's ready for that. He's getting his gear together. His grandmother works at Albean, so we're going to make a trip there and get him outfitted. But there's, none of his friends hunt. They all game. He plays football. He does all the other things, a young boy does. But, he's the only one that hunts in his friends group. So I think there's a big decline. And I don't know whether it's parents are getting out of it, maybe. I don't see as many people hunting. You don't bump into as many people in the woods, I think, generally. I think the numbers are down. There's a push. I've got a lot of friends, some female guide friends, and there's a lot of these becoming an outdoors woman group or women hunters group, and they're really promoting that, and I think that's a great thing. My girlfriend, having horses, doesn't want to shoot a deer. They look too much like a horse to her. She supports it, doesn't want to see it. No problem with the turkeys, because she's had turkeys and chickens, so she understands that process. But she has, we've had some fisher come in and destroy the chickens, and they're brutal. If you've ever seen a fisher when they go in, they just slash and slash. They take some with and they leave them. So she says, what's the answer to that? I said, well, I used to trap when I had a woodlot. I trapped coyote and fisher. So she's like, I want to do that. I don't want coyote on the property. I don't want fisher on the property. And we've got some fisher on game cam that are just, they're just massive. And I also told her, I said, have you ever seen a chipmunk, a gray squirrel, or a red squirrel on your farm or anywhere in the woods on your property? She goes, no. I said, well, there's a reason. The fisher are doing that. You should see chipmunks, you should see red squirrels, you should see gray squirrels. She's got apple trees, she's got oaks, it's just the perfect ecosystem. Never seen a small animal on her farm.
Is it a badger?
It's a fisher's related to the wolverine family. It's just it's a long cat-like animal. It's the only thing that'll kill a porcupine in Maine. It's just got razor sharp claws. They have a vicious scream at night. It sounds like a baby dying. It's just a sick. If you've ever heard it, it's a sickening.
Foxes sound like that too.
Even worse. This is even worse than a fox. Yeah, but
It's kind of like
so.
it's like a big weasel.
yeah, big. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're a beautiful animal. The pelt's beautiful. It's a beautiful animal, but they're extremely destructive to chickens, especially cats, house cats. She has 2 house cats that don't leave the house, and Bob the barn cat, and he was a feral cat, and he's pretty cagey, but I mean, the picture I have is running right along the fence next to the house. This fish is not even out in the woods. So poor Bob. I don't want to, I like Bob. Bob's a cool cat. And he takes care of the mouse population in the barn, which she's got a 200-year-old farm, so could be a lot of mice. I've never seen a mouse. And I cut the fields, and I've only seen 2 moles. And normally when you cut fields, things are jumping out of the grass left and right, and I've only seen 2 moles the entire time I've been doing that. So there's something going on there, and I think there's a big fisher population. So.
The llama, know anything about that? Do llamas go after fishers?
No, I don't think a fisher would go after a llama. No, I don't think a fisher would kill a big animal, but it'll.
Would a llama keep it?
No,
away?
she has a donkey. Paul he's a small donkey. He would keep when there's a coyote, he runs out and he guards.
Yeah.
He kind of guards the horses. But no, they're too small an animal to take something like that on.
No, but I mean, the llama will not take, or the alpaca would not take on the fisher.
I think it might chase it a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know enough about alpacas. I know the donkey would. Paul would chase anything. He's the guard.
Good.
Yeah, he's in charge of the herd. So yeah.
So you mentioned ticks, and
Yeah.
I'm not from this area, so
Yep.
I'm curious, is there a big tick problem in
There's a
Maine?
huge tick problem, and it's really killing the moose. In fact, they opened a special season in a certain part of Maine. I can't remember where it is, but I think it's above Millinocket, towards Baxter, where they're having extra moose taken because that's what the ticks are thriving on up there. They're killing them. They're killing calves. They're draining the blood out of the calves. So when I was a kid, I didn't know what a tick was. They were down south. I knew that, but and then they started coming in. I started getting them on my hunting dogs when I was a young man. And then knock wood, I've had them on me. I've never had one burrow in, but I have a lot of friends that have gotten Lyme disease, and it's debilitating. It's very hard to diagnose. So yeah, they're a huge problem, and
Is that because of changing climate?
they were real big in Lyme, Connecticut. That's where the Lyme disease came from, and they were on deer, and they made their way north. And I would guess it would be a gradual warming of the climate, but I'm not 100% sure. Sebago Lake doesn't always freeze. The big lake doesn't freeze. My bay, I live in Jordan Bay, and that always freezes. But the big lake doesn't always freeze. But back 30 years ago, it always froze. But then I go back and I look at these ice out charts for both Sebago, Rangeley, Lake Auburn, and you look in the 1800s, and there were trends where there were these warming trends that, the ice didn't form or the ice out was real early. So I don't know if we're just in that cyclical nature or global warming is causing it. I'm not sure which the answer is. Maybe I think probably a combination of both. But they're up here now and they're a problem. Right now, this spring they were crazy. I mean, you couldn't walk out in the field and not get ticks all over you. And we spray for them, we check for them. The horses are treated for them. The last couple months, I haven't seen any at all, and I've been out in the woods quite a bit scouting that property. I think as it gets cooler, it might peak again before winter, but we'll see. But they're a tremendous problem. They're bad for animals. They're real bad for people. And my girlfriend's had two that have burrowed into her, and they disfigure you. They leave a disfiguring scar. And they say there's something that they do it's their saliva or whatever it is. It's very damaging. She got treated with doxycycline before the Lyme kicked in, but yeah, they're very bad.
They do say, because when I lived down in Pennsylvania, it was 10 times worse than it even is here now. I mean,
Yeah.
You couldn't go in your yard without getting 5 or 6 ticks on you sometimes.
Yeah, there's wood ticks and deer ticks. Deer ticks are the one that carry Lyme, so they're different.
Well, they said that the deer ticks have to embed for 72 hours before there's a decent chance of you getting Lyme. So as long as you check,
Yeah,
you're usually pretty
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, we're pretty. I mean, we tuck our boots in and their socks in and spray, and the horses get treated with permethrin. But I've pulled them off of them
Even
before.
sometimes the nymphs you can't see, and they
Yeah.
still spread
Yeah.
Lyme disease, but they're too small to
Yeah.
see, or they get on your head, and
Yeah.
there's no way you're going to see it.
Yeah, well, I would see it. You might not see it. I would see it.
You have the advantage.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions at all?
So,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna ask questions, I'm gonna.
Well, go right ahead. Yeah.
So you talk about moose, now.
Yep.
Do you actually hunt moose, or?
I've been on 2 moose hunts. You have to get drawn in a lottery, and it's a chance. And I was drawn in 2000 for a cow, and up by the Rangeley area. I got one second day, and then 2012 I had a bull permit, so I shot a beautiful bull. I have one friend. He's going this year. He was my detective sergeant when he worked for me. He's retired now. He's going on his 16th moose hunt, but he's got a big French family, and everybody and their brother and sister and cousin puts in for the permit. So his chances are, and he's dragged his 10-year-old daughter on the hunt because she drew the permit, took her out of school so he could harvest the moose. Now the girls have actually taken moose themselves, but so I think he was just fishing with me in the Derby on Sebago Lake this weekend, and yeah, I asked him, I said, you've gotten a moose permit every year. You've been on a moose hunt every year. He goes, no, there's been a year or two that I didn't go, but I said, well, how many? 16. 16 was, and it started, I was in college when it started. So moose were, I think it was 1935, they stopped the moose hunt because the numbers had gone down. Market hunting, caribou, used to be caribou in Maine. In fact, the camp that we rented in Rangeley when I was younger had an original caribou head on the fireplace. So they knocked out the caribou, market hunting knocked the caribou out, and then it kind of dwindled the moose, so they shut it off in, I think, 35. And then in 1982, they opened it back up. Very limited, extremely limited. In fact, it was such a big deal, I remember going to the weighing station in Greenville to see the moose come in. It was just, I mean, you couldn't hunt them for, how many years, 30, 50 years, and then boom, all of a sudden you can. And back then, when we bird hunted, you saw moose all over the place, and they just stood there and looked at you. Well, since 1982 to now, they don't stand around anymore. They very rarely stand around to see you. If they see a truck coming in the woods, they skedaddle. But
Do they eat those moose?
oh, they're delicious. Yeah, moose I think is a little better than deer. It's a little less gamey than deer. The bull I shot was terrible. He had pus coming out his sides. He had a cow with him, and he had been fighting off other bulls. He was the big guy in the neighborhood, and they were all trying to get that cow away from him, and he was just gored from antlers in his sides, pus coming out, and even the tenderloin on it was so tough you could barely eat it. So what I did is I canned it. So you put it in a pressure cooker in a can, like a canning jar, and that makes leather. You could eat shoe leather, but and then some sausage. But the cow was phenomenal. It was very 600-pound cow, and was very very easy to.
Must be hard to get that out, though.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, you got to plan for it. I take a trailer, I take a four-wheeler, I take big things of I freeze milk jugs, gallon milk jugs of ice. and, you know, a lot of gear, even, you know, we wear a rain suit when we gut them because it's like tending to a cow. They're massive. You know, they're just a big animal, and you got to get right up in there, and a rain suit is probably the best way to keep yourself somewhat clean. So, but we've been fortunate. I got both on the second day, and got them iced down, and you know, took good care of them. I'm pretty particular about my stuff, though.
Did you put their heads up?
Well, the cow I didn't, but the bull I mounted what they call a European mount. So it's the skull. I boiled the skull, so it's on a plaque with the antlers. So yeah. I did. I have a beautiful bear rug at my house at the lake. I shot a big black bear in New Brunswick, and I have a beautiful bear rug. I had done the Canadian government had brought me up for a bird hunting trip to this guide in New Brunswick. His name's Earl Peterson. He's sadly passed, but he took me on, and I always bring my photographer with on these trips, and that's my buddy Rennie. That's my lieutenant. That's the guy that's in the book, and he did a grouse, woodcock, duck hunt in New Brunswick, and then took us over to Prince Edward Island 2 days for geese. And it was a phenomenal hunt. It was just one of the best experiences I ever had. And I wrote a couple articles on it, but one got picked up by the NRA's magazine, American Hunter, which is the biggest, 1.4 million readership. And LL Bean provided all the clothing. A couple gun manufacturers provided guns and ammunition. So I had really, you know, where to go, how to go, what to bring. It was a big article. And that article booked his entire next fall by people interested in going on a trip. And I won't write about a place if it's not a good trip. I won't fluff it up. If it's a good trip, it's a good trip, and I write about it. If it's not a good trip, I'll either write and say it's not a good trip, or I won't write. And generally, you don't write about it. I've been fortunate. I've had all good trips. But so he called me up. Earl called me up, and he said, I got to thank you. I had to build an extra lodge house for all the people that you sent from that article. And I said, well, it's true, Earl. You put on a great product. This guy was just a great guide. He had great dogs. It was a great location. Everything was phenomenal. And he said, well, I want to treat you to a bear hunt as a token of my thanks. So he had me up, and that's when I got that great big bear. Sadly, he traded hunts out west. I think it was Wyoming, a horseback elk hunt, which is something I'd love to do. I'd love to go on a horse and hunt elk. And he was up there with the outfitter, and their trailer jackknifed on one of these mountain roads, and they both got killed. So I would have probably gone up every fall to see Earl if that hadn't happened. And that was literally the season after this. And a number of years ago, I got an email from his son, and he said he doesn't have any pictures of his dad. Would I send him any I had? And I had quite a number of photos of him, so I sent him all the photos I had of his dad, which I felt good about that. Earl was a nice guy, he was a character, and I would have enjoyed a long relationship with him, I think, if he was still around. So.
In the book,
Mm-hmm.
is it all good stories that went well? Are there any?
Well, there's nothing. I mean, there's nobody died or anything like that.
Okay.
But there's a lot of. I like to poke fun at people, and I like to have fun poked at me. I've kind of got that sense of humor, and I've got a thick enough skin that, in fact, I really like when somebody gets me. And my girlfriend's boy, the 14-year-old that I'm taking hunting, he gets me pretty good once in a while. He's got a similar sense of humor like that. But there's a lot of misadventures that happened, and I find a lot of them humorous. And I talk about, there's a disclaimer in front of the book that some of it may be potty humor or something like that. If you're easily offended, okay, but it's stuff that happened in the woods. One of them is my chocolate lab was hunting. We were bird hunting in Greenville during the week of the moose hunt. And that's never the best because there's a ton of people hunting moose on the road, and you're trying to go from spot to spot, and they really stir up the birds. But I wanted to go up there, and Rennie was with me, my hunting partner, and let the dog out to work a spot, and he goes in the woods. I said, oh, he's birdie, he's on something. And he comes out, and he's got something white on his mouth he's chewing on. So I go over to check him out. Well, somebody had stopped, the moose hunter stopped and used the bathroom in the woods, threw some toilet paper. And my dog never, some dogs roll in poop, some dogs eat other dogs' poop, some dog eats their own poop. My dog never ate any poop. He didn't eat deer poop, the first time he ate human poop. So I was mad. I'm trying to scrape it out of his mouth. I got out of my hands now, and what do you do? And so I keep stuff to clean up in the truck because we clean our birds right there. And so anyway, and we go to another spot, turn them out, same thing. Somebody else pooped. Now, what's the chance? We're way up above, we're in Northeast Cary, way above Greenville, way out in the middle of nowhere. Somebody else, same guy, I don't know, somebody. So my buddy Mouse is teasing me about that. I says, your dog's frigged up. He says, he's frigged up doing that. So we hunt, we get some birds, and on the ride home, the dog would generally sit in the front and put his mouth on Rennie's lap. Rennie's nickname is Mouse. Put his muzzle on Mouse, and then they both fall asleep. Well, I'm driving down the road, and they're both sleeping, and I see the dog stir a little bit, and I see him like that a couple of times, and he let go on Mouse's lap. And I thought that was kind of funny because Mouse was teasing me about him. But anyway, there's things like that in there, those types of things, and a lot of with dogs. I'll tell one other story about my dog, and it makes me proud. So when I was a police officer in Auburn, we had a secretary who was an older woman that was there for quite a long time, and she transferred. Esther, her name is, and she's a sweet woman. She transferred, went to City Hall as the clerk. She took the town clerk job, or I think assistant clerk's job. So I had just gotten my chocolate lab. That's not him. That's a golden I had. And but Luke's in there. Luke was in a lot of magazines. He was a handsome dog. I had just gotten Luke. He's about a year and a half, and he was kind of rambunctious. And the vet suggested I neuter him. So I neutered him, and I wanted to breed him, but I decided against that. So I neutered him, and I went to City Hall to renew my dog license. I think he was then 2, so it would have been his second year. So there's a discount for a neutered dog. So I went into City Hall, and Esther was at the counter, and I had this all planned. And I said, Esther, I'd like to register Luke. She know Luke. I brought him to the station a lot. And I said, there's a discount, right? Because he was neutered this year. She goes, yep, you just have to show proof. And I said, I got it in the truck. So we go out to the truck. Now I had asked the vet for the remnants of the neutering. Well, the vet wouldn't give them to me. I remember when my father had his gallbladder out, they gave him he had a gallstone. They gave him the gallstone in a little thing, and he brought it home. We had it in the pantry forever. It was a great big thing, but they don't do that anymore. So I had the next best thing. I had Luke out in the truck. So I brought him in, and I walked into the City Hall, and I lifted him up, and I put him on the counter. I bent his tail back, and I said, here's your proof, Esther. And her exact words were, get that goddamn dog off the table. So you fool, is what she said. So anyway, I had the neutering paperwork in my pocket. So I talk about that in there, and I run into Esther once in a while, and I say, Esther, remember when I brought my dog? Oh, you're a fool. But yeah, so there's a lot of things like that I think is funny, and a lot of adventures with Rennie. But yeah, nothing bad. I was never on the place I was caribou hunting, not the week I was there, but one of the weeks, a guy died up there, and we were talking northern Quebec, so you drive to Montreal, which is about 5 hours. You fly a Tundra jet, which is a big jet with massive tires. You fly that about 3 hours north to a place called Kennepisco, which is the last, well, there's not even roads there. And then you take a float plane another hour north of that. So you're up near the Arctic Circle. And they have a tent, but it's basically a screened-in porch to keep the meat. They hang the caribou meat. And then they have the cabins where you sleep. And a guy had a heart attack up there hunting. And, you got to call, back then there was they had satellite phones back then, but that was the only way. And weather restricts float planes coming in. So they had to wrap this guy in a tarp and put him in the meat tent until he could be brought out. And the owners of the caribou camp are a friend of mine. It's the grandparents of this kid I took hunting and a daycare provider. But then the guy's wife had his ashes sent back up there, and they scattered his ashes up there at the caribou camp because I guess he was a regular customer there. But I wasn't there for that. But Rennie was with me one year, a number of years back, and he broke his ankle severely. We were pheasant hunting, and I don't think I wrote about it in the book, but he hollered, and I went to him. He tried to jump a stream in the mud, and twisted it, and I said, you probably sprained it. And he goes, I didn't sprain it. When I got there, I looked, his foot was going the other direction. So that was a gruesome one. But I've been EMT trained and all that stuff, so I was able to at least get him stabilized until we could get rescue in there to help. But that was only in Gorham, so we weren't like up in the woods somewhere. We were still a ways off the road. But no, everything's pretty happy and lighthearted, and yeah, nothing that I can remember anything bad in there.
Do you ever go fly fishing?
I do. I was just up in Labrador for a week. We flew in. Rennie and I went up there. We flew in because now you could get into the country. for trophy brook trout. We drove up there 26 hours straight, and then we took a float plane about another hour north of there. And I got my biggest brook trout ever, 7 pounds. And there's bigger ones up there, and we're definitely going to go back. Rennie had a health condition last year and kicked it, and he's 81 now. And with COVID, we'd been trying to get into Labrador for a couple of years, and this was kind of like a big trip for us. We were able to get up there, and even at 81, he's still pretty strong. There were guys up there who were younger than he was and couldn't. We hiked in 2 miles to a remote pond to fish, and he did it, and they couldn't believe at 81 he could do that. But a life spent outdoors. It's you keep active and you keep moving. It helps a lot.
My brother fished the Amazon.
Oh,
He got a rainbow, big, huge.
Yeah.
Big, huge.
Yeah.
Fish and rainbow, and then he's gone sailfish.
Yep.
All he does is fly fishing.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm a big fly fisherman. I learned to troll from Rennie, and that's how we fish on Sebago. We troll flies sometimes, but I do fly fish, and I enjoy it. I just don't, when you live on a lake and you can walk down the dock and get on your boat and fish, it's tough to go elsewhere. Of course, range, and I follow just like in the book, I follow ice out. So the ice generally goes out at Sebago first. So before my dock's in, I use the trailer and put the boat in and fish. And then it goes out Thompson Lake next, which is a really good lake near me. We fish that. Then Lake Auburn goes out. We fish that. But the next big one is Rangeley. And when Rangeley goes out, we go up there. And that's fishing like what it was years ago. It really is. Rangeley's it's protected. It's very pristine. And I look forward to those trips. And then once that trip's done, my dock's in and my boat stays on Sebago, and it'll stay there through October. And I fish. I generally hunt on Saturdays in October. I don't guide hunter. I just hunt for myself, but I'm still guiding up through October on Sundays. So
Have you ever fished Sebec?
no, going by it, of course. But I have a friend that has a camp on it. I don't know what's in it. I'm guessing salmon, right? I think they have salmon in there, don't they?
Salmon, pike,
Yeah.
trout,
Brook trout or lake trout?
rainbow.
Oh, rainbow. So they stocked it. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
It gets stocked
Yeah.
at the bridge.
Yep, fished Moosehead, fished Lobster Lake up there. My college roommate's father worked for what was then Great Northern Paper Company, so we had the best deal going. In college, we would leave and we'd go up to Greenville. His dad would give us the Great Northern truck because the family was allowed to drive it. And the great thing about that, well, number one, it was a four-wheel drive truck, but number two, it had a radio in it because that was before cell phones. And there were people at different outposts along the woods that had radio. They were the gatekeepers and they had radios. So if something happened, you had a radio. Annie had a snowmobile, which a kid in college didn't have a snowmobile. Annie had a gas auger, and we didn't have a gas auger. We had the old hand crank, So we would get the truck. We would head up to Lobster Lake, and his father ran the Lobster Lake operation. So there were cabins for the woodcutters, and then there was a cook cabin. And the woodcutters were all French Canadian. They would go home on the weekend, so it was vacant. And the cook would key. He knew we were coming, and he would make usually shepherd's pie and a nice cake. And we had that there for us when we got there. So we had a place to stay. We had a snowmobile. And Lobster Lake, other than flying in by airplane, is pretty difficult to get into. At least it was back then in the 80s. So that was a really great thing to have access to.
Do you have any problems with lead killing when you are hunting?
Lead, that's an interesting thing, and I thought a lot more about it this year. So back I was still duck hunting when you could use lead, and then they switched to steel only. First they tried it experimental, and they went to steel. I will say that steel does not kill birds as well as lead, but ducks are in the water primarily, and all that lead going in the water caused problems. So the steel shot remedied that. We still use lead bullets. We still use lead pellets when we hunt grouse or pheasant or things like that. And lately I've been reading about these eagles that are sick. And they were, I heard a couple people say, well, they're ingesting lead from these animals that ran off. And I've shot a number of deer in my lifetime. I've never lost one. And generally when you get the deer, you find the bullet. And I have a lot of bullets I have the bullet and the casing for the first deer I ever shot in Corinna. But I was reading an article that said there are some pieces that can splinter off and go into the meat. So there's a move to go to copper ammunition, copper slugs. So I'm looking into that. I would probably want to do that because I don't want lead in the deer meat. You know, you usually cut out around, but boy, a little piece could go off. Um, and as far as bird shot, you know, bismuth and some of these other tungstens are starting to come out. The problem is they're crazy expensive. And I've got I've got 2 file cabinets full of shot shells that I've either bought through the years, I got from manufacturers free, or when I was a police officer, people would come into the station all the time and turn in ammo. And whatever gauge we had, if I had a 20 gauge shotgun, I'd take that and, you know, I'd bring it home. And I got, I mean, a foolish amount of ammo at home. I really never probably have to buy any.
Does
But
ammo go bad?
not really. The old paper shells would if they got wet, but the modern stuff doesn't go bad. Steel casings doesn't go bad. No. But I think there's something to be said about that. You know, the more I read, I was skeptical at first. I said, how many animals are running off and dying? You know, we don't lose, especially with a dog, you don't lose game. You know, if you shoot a bird, your dog's going to find it. You know, but I guess it does happen. So.
Sebago was an eagle that died from lead.
Yeah, and lead sinkers, they've pretty much restricted that except the larger sinkers. You can have a half-ounce sinker or a jig head that's lead. And a lot of the bass fishermen fish with jigs with a lead head. And a lot of the lake trout we open up, it's funny, they'll have rubber worms or plastic worms in them, and they don't digest, they plug them up, and cigarette butts. And I asked a biologist why they had cigarette butts in them. And when the cigarette butt goes to the bottom of the lake, it generally sits and floats upright like that. And the trout are going along and they see that and they think it's a worm or some type of a creature, and they grab it real quick. And I couldn't figure out why I was finding. I thought, are they floating down and they think it's a minnow? But the biologist said no, they float on the bottom for a while, and the fish grab them.
I've never heard about that.
Yeah, well, trust me, I clean a lot of lake trout out, and there's a lot of cigarette
Yeah,
butts in them.
because
And
you'll see them out there smoking.
yeah, a lot of people in a boat chuck their
Yeah.
cigarette.
Pass eventually, or do they?
No, they're too fibrous. They expand and they stay in the stomach. And the rubber worms are really a problem. So now they're talking about going to biodegradable rubber worms, but the fishing industry is kind of fighting that. So I don't know, but there's definitely a lot of changes they could make. But I went through I have my dad's old tackle bag. I went through everything and took all the lead out, turned it in, and we use steel split shot now. So I try to reduce what I can, and I'm definitely interested in learning more about these copper slugs for deer.
Could you say a couple words about how you got started with your interest in these outdoor sports with your dad, who was a sportsman, and
Yeah.
he took you out?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. My dad didn't start out a sportsman. He grew up in Wisconsin, and he liked to fish. He lived right on Lake Michigan, so he fished as a kid. But he was an executive with an insurance company, and one of the things that the executive did is they belonged to a duck hunting club in Illinois, and it was they had a clubhouse and a bar, and they had these great blinds, everything. So it was kind of a social thing. So they said, "Oh, you got to join the club. You're part of the group now." And so he started duck hunting, and then got into pheasant hunting, which was big out there. When I was a kid, I remember looking at some of his old stuff, like his shotgun. He'd let me see it once in a while, and the vest was hanging in the corner with the shells in it. And my grandfather, my mother's dad, he grew up on a farm, and he hunted. So I've got all of his gear. I've got all his antique fishing reels, and there's a picture of him with what I think is me with my first fish. My mother took the picture, and I was 18 or 20 months old. I found the picture after both my parents passed, so I couldn't ask them, but I'm pretty sure it was probably my first fish. And there's a picture of a fly rod sitting on the dock, and I have that fly rod and reel. It was my grandfather's. So I just grew up kind of hearing stories about it, and I fished since I was probably 20 months old. I remember fishing as a kid forever. My mother was kind of a tomboy, and she loved to fish. So when my dad would go out with his buddies, we were at a lake, I'd stay on the dock, and she'd help me and fish. And I really pushed him to hunt. He'd gotten out of hunting. And I said, I really want to hunt. So I did what he did. I bird hunted. So we belonged to a fishing game club that raised pheasants and would stock them. And he had buddies that had pointing dogs, so we'd go with them and hunt with the dogs, which was a blast. And so really all I did hunting-wise was pheasant hunt with my dad. Then when I went to college, I had roommates that duck hunted and deer hunted. So I started duck hunting in college, got my first wood duck. My first duck was a wood duck up out of Pushaw Lake in outside of Orono, outside of Old Town, and got my first deer in Corinna with one of my roommates, and was just hooked on it, and then just continued and continued. And Ray Owen, our advisor, asked us to put on a hunter safety class for all. We had a lot of students who would come that never hunted at Orono into this wildlife program that was from inner cities, and they wanted to hunt. So we became hunter safety instructors and taught hunter safety at college, and then would take these kids that never hunted before out and got them into it. So that was a lot of fun. So yeah, in the book I talk about, it started with my mom and dad and a little bit of my grandfather, and that was my undergraduate degree. But my supervisor, Rennie, that was my graduate studies. That was my graduate degree, because he was really a consummate, and still is, a consummate outdoors person. And out of all the years we've had adventures, we've never had a squabble. We've never, it's kind of interesting how you, develop a friendship. And I think and I talk about this in the book, I think a lot of kids don't spend time with their parents. And I spent a lot of time with my father in the woods. My mother too, but more so my father. And we talked about a ton of stuff in the boat. Maybe not sometimes bad stuff, maybe some things I'd done I shouldn't have done, or guidance. My dad was just a good man, and I think all that time I spent with him, I always respected my father growing up. I never had a period of time where I didn't respect him. So I think that the outdoors was a huge shaper for that. My girlfriend's boy is really interested in all of this stuff, and she's happy because he doesn't have his father's not around. His father lives way out of state, so he doesn't spend a lot of time with his dad. So she sees this as a real positive thing for him, and he's hooked as a youngster. So I'm glad I've got yet another one to kind of bring up. And there's a number of stories about kids I took hunting or fishing in the book. So, but yeah, definitely an important part of my life, and I think always will be. Hopefully I make it as long as Rainey, if not longer. So, yeah. Good. Anything else? No? Well, thank you folks for taking your time to come here. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got copies if anybody wants a copy of the book. Thank you.
I'd like to get one. If
Okay.
You
Yeah.
take, I don't know, depends what you take.
I take checks, cash, PayPal, or